You don't like Donald Trump, do you?
I don't respect the manner in which he has carried out the presidency.
Okay. You despise Donald Trump, don't you?
No, I don't despise anyone, Senator.
I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language here.
I'm not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here's the reason. Let me give you a little idea of the timing.
Okay, but let me stop you because I don't have much time. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical here, but at what point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
Well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was appointed.
That determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
This was one of the spiciest Senate hearings you'll ever see, and Senator John Kennedy was on absolute fire, facing off against former acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Kennedy didn't just ask questions. He roasted her arguments with surgical precision, razor-sharp humor, and that signature Southern charm that had the whole room glued to their seats in disbelief. This wasn't about policy tweaks. It was about the Constitution, who holds real power, and who gets to decide what's legal in America. Grab your popcorn, and before we dive in, smash that subscribe button so you never miss these epic showdowns.
Ms. Yates, Dr. Clapper, thank you both for your years of service to the American people. Ms. Yates, I want to start with you. You declined to support, to defend President Trump's executive order because you thought it was unconstitutional. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And you believe that no reasonable argument could be made in its defense. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that I would put it in that way, Senator. This was the analysis that we went through.
Okay. Let me stop you because I've got a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
I just want to understand your thinking from my perspective.
Sure.
Did you believe then that there were reasonable arguments that could be made in its defense?
I believed that any argument that we would have to make in its defense would not be grounded in the truth. Because to make an argument in its defense, we would have to argue that the executive order had nothing to do with religion, that it was not done with an intent to discriminate against Muslims.
Okay.
And based on a variety of factors.
You were looking at intent?
Yes, and I believe that that's the appropriate analysis. And in fact, that's been borne out in several court decisions since that time, that that's the appropriate analysis when you're doing a constitutional analysis. It's to look to see what are you trying to accomplish here.
Okay. Suppose instead of an executive order, this had been an act of Congress, would you have refused to defend it?
If it were the same act, yes.
Okay.
And in fact, the Department of Justice has done that in the past. For example, with DOMA,
right.
The Defense of Marriage Act, when the Department of Justice refused to defend DOMA.
But that was a political decision, was it not?
Well, I wasn't at Main Justice at that time, so I can't speak to that, but that was another example of when DOJ did not defend the constitutionality of a statute in that sense.
But in your opinion, the executive order is unconstitutional?
I certainly was not convinced that it was constitutional, and given that I wasn't, and the import of this, I couldn't in good conscience send Department of Justice lawyers in to defend it.
Well, I want to be sure I understand. Do you believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
I was not convinced that it was constitutional. I believed that it was unconstitutional in the sense that there was no way in the world I could send folks in there to argue something that we didn't believe to be the truth.
So you believe it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
Okay. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language here.
I'm not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here's the reason. Let me give you a little idea of the timing.
Okay, but let me stop you because I don't have much time. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical here, but at what point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
Well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I mean, what I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was appointed.
That determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. Not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibility seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm just trying to understand. This is likely to come up in the future.
Well,
at what point does an executive order or statute become unconstitutional? When I think it's unconstitutional, or you think it's unconstitutional, or a court of final jurisdiction says it's unconstitutional?
I believe that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General. If the president asks him or her to do something that he or she believes is unlawful or unconstitutional, to say no. And that's what I did.
Okay, I get it. All right, let me ask you both a couple of questions. Can we agree, Director and Counselor, that the Russians attempted to influence the outcome of the election?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you believe that the Russians did, in fact, influence the outcome of the election, Director?
In our intelligence community assessment, we made the point that we could not make that call. The intelligence community has neither the authority, the expertise, or the resources to make that judgment. The only thing we said was we saw no evidence of influencing voter tallies in any of the 50 states. But we were not in a position to judge what actual outcome on the election.
How about you, Ms. Yates?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that's part of the problem is we'll never know.
When a top Justice Department official flat out refuses to defend the president's lawful executive order, it raises some serious red flags. The tension kicked off early. Kennedy leans in, calm but deadly sharp. Ms. Yates, you refuse to defend the president's executive order. Why? Yates says she believed it was unconstitutional and targeted Muslims. Kennedy gives that classic slight smirk, the one that says, "Oh, honey, we're about to tear this apart. So let me get this straight," he drawls. "You just decided all by your lonesome that the President of the United States broke the law." Yates tries to explain. Kennedy cuts in, polite but firm. "Ma'am, I didn't ask for an essay. Just a yes or no." The room chuckles. Yates, not so much. Kennedy's questions get sharper. Tone playful but razor serious. At what point does something become unconstitutional, Miss Yates? When you feel it is? Or when the Supreme Court says so? She stumbles, talking intent and analysis. Kennedy leans back, eyebrow up, and drops the hammer. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court? Dead silence. Then a few muffled laughs. That one hit like a freight train, and Kennedy knew it. He wasn't bullying. He was delivering a civics lesson with a side of Southern sass. Kennedy keeps the pressure on. Laws and executive orders are presumed constitutional until a court says otherwise. America runs on law, not feelings. Feelings are for Hallmark cards, not courtrooms. Yates cracks a tight smile. She knows she's outgunned. He pivots to the Defense of Marriage Act, another time DOJ refused to defend. Was that principle? Or just politics in a robe? Yates dodges. Kennedy shakes his head. Seems like y'all only refuse to defend laws when a Republican signs them. Ouch. Half the room shifts uncomfortably. Kennedy just smiles. That calm, knowing grin that says he came loaded. Then he flips it fast. Let's talk about Russia. Did they try to meddle in the 2016 election? Yes, she says. Did they change the outcome? Silence. Then, no evidence of that. Kennedy leans back, folds his hands, and grins. So they tried, but didn't succeed. Kinda like my first diet. The room explodes in laughter. Even Yates smirks. By the end, Kennedy owned that hearing. He exposed the double standards, defended the rule of law, and did it all with that perfect mix of wit and intellect only he can pull off. His message was crystal America runs on law, not emotions, not politics. And when the law gets tested, Kennedy's gonna be there, reminding everybody how the Constitution actually works. What do you think? Should unelected bureaucrats be able to overrule a president before the courts even weigh in? Sound off in the comments, and don't forget, hit subscribe for more of these fiery moments where truth meets tenacity.